Yasmeen, please join me on the stage. And so our next session will also be about go-to-market plans, and it's about asking the right questions when working on the go-to-market plan. Yasmeen, welcome.
Nice to meet you. Can you hear me?
Can hear you perfectly.
Okay, great.
So I'll get out of your way. You share your screen and off you go. Thank you.
Okay, great. For some reason, I am unable to share my screen. 1 second. Okay, great. All right. All right, so I just wanted to say hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you guys about go-to-market. And so I hope that this conversation can actually be interactive. I don't want to just talk at you. I want you guys to walk away having learned something and having contemplation, really, when thinking about the go-to-market process. I can't see the chat right now, but if you guys could just drop where you're dialing in from, maybe which company you work at, what questions that you have. I'd love to spend at least 10 minutes at the end answering your questions. I think that questions generally are the most important part of these presentations. So I'm going to leave some time at the end for that. So the most important questions to ask when building a go-to-market. First of all, so you guys know who I am, I'm Yasmeen Turayhi. I'm a product marketing exec. I wrote the book Product Marketing Debunked, and I also have a show called The Essential Go-to-Market. And I've worked at a lot of different companies. I have actually been consulting and have my own consulting practice for the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years. And I've worked with, as you can see, a lot of different companies, a lot of different growth stages, verticals, and industries. So I've kind of seen it all. I've seen early stage startups, I've seen late stage startups, and it's been really fascinating to get a window into some of the processes that have emerged at each stage of the startup. So I can't actually see the question, so maybe someone can just let me know if there's any questions. And by the way, you guys can also ask questions while I'm talking, no problem. Okay, so most startups really spend time on things that don't matter or at best are neutral. And let me talk a little bit about that. I think that most companies end up hiring a lot of different roles. They assume that they should be building maybe a social media strategy, maybe a content strategy, a demand gen strategy, but they're not really thinking about all those things together as like a symphony of different pieces of the organization, and also as different tools to further the goals of the organization. So the first question that I'd like to ask really when I'm working with companies and even product teams is, where do you guys want to be 1 year from now, or even 5 years from now? And how are some of our short-term goals aligning with these long-term goals? And oftentimes I find that so many people are working on things that frankly do not matter or that add very little value. So being really thoughtful about this first part is incredibly important. I think that most people just like to, there's a quote that I used to use, I think Rollo May said, people end up running faster when they don't know what they're doing. Like it's actually time for people to pause and really think about what's the strategic lens of what we're building. One of the biggest things that I also see is that the product roadmap is often not in alignment and in sync with the marketing roadmap. So for example, a company might be what we call GA, generally available. They might have built a product, a number of products and features for a quarter or a month, and all those products get rolled out, but marketing is just looking at a top of funnel lens. So they're creating things from a top of funnel perspective, but they're not really thinking about how should we package these products and features under the umbrella of marketing, and really think about how these products and features align with our longer term vision. That's what product marketing is about. Oftentimes, a lot of product marketers do not do that. They do not even look at their features and have an understanding of how important one feature is compared to another, and how they should be telling their story within the lens of the product roadmap. So that's really one of the most important roles that a product marketer and a go-to-market owner can often own. So, and again, I can't see the screen, so if you want to ask questions, feel free to just chime in. So before we dive into the questions, I think it'd be really important for you guys to tell me on a scale of 1 to 5, on these 3 questions: how well do you know your customer? How well do you know the message that resonates with them? And how comfortable do you feel with your go-to-market strategy to date? I think it's just interesting to get a gauge of where people are at. And I think most people will say that the go-to-market strategy is kind of a never-ending thing. It's something that you could create, but there's always new line items to add to it. There's always new information. Competitors might be building something that leapfrogs yours. So there's a lot of different, I'd say, gauges on how well you know your customer and your go-to-market strategy. So I'm just curious if you guys want to drop that in the chat, or if you just want to take your own self-assessment, now would be a good time. So question 1, and I want to actually take some time to pause for you guys to write these things down. Have you identified your target market and market segments? And when I say this, I think that a lot of people, especially early stage companies, tend to maybe over-index for creating target markets, because at this stage you're probably going to be going through a lot of iterations. So you don't want to over-define your target market either at a very early stage. At a very later stage company, Series B, Series C, public companies, if you have a very defined product and you know your target market, that's a totally separate thing. But I think a lot of people don't spend enough time with their target market and market segments. There's not really any one owner who sits and spends time with the customer. We often spend time with customers when we're trying to get product feedback, when we're doing some kind of surveys. But for the most part, I think most people don't often spend enough time. And I think that's a shame, because that is kind of your golden ticket to building out your product roadmap, to understanding what is resonating with people from a marketing perspective. So unfortunately, a lot of CEOs, a lot of founders, executive teams, they do not put a premium price tag on this piece, because they think oftentimes it doesn't have a direct result. So oftentimes people think it's a waste of time, which is so unfortunate, because I could tell you, after working with so many different startups and presenting to a lot of different accelerators and just having access to so much information on many founders, the one big thing that differentiates companies that succeed in the long term is how much time they spent with their customers. And of course, we shouldn't be, looking at your customers for all types of information, right? Like, you want to have like your own hypotheses about what they want, but that should be married with customer feedback. Do you understand your customer pain points and how much time and money they want to spend on your platform, or how much time and money they want to spend on your product or service? But essentially, the bigger the pain points, the bigger the value proposition. And this is an interesting question. Oftentimes when I do this type of research, customers will say, oh, I really love the product and this is something I absolutely need. But then when I will qualify that, when I'll say, hey, on a scale of 1 to 5, how willing are you to pay for this product or service at this price tag, or at a different price tag? And oftentimes that's like really the test. Like, our customers, not just finding your product service something that helps alleviate a pain point, but is it also something that they're willing to pay for? And how much are they willing to pay for that? I mean, these are really, really important questions to ask. And so I just think it's really interesting to find sometimes a huge disconnect when people are like, yeah, I absolutely want this product, but I will not spend a dime on it. So that you won't have a product to sell if a lot of customers are going to be saying that. Do you understand your value proposition and how your customer perceives it? And note, I say how your customer perceives your value proposition. It's not how you perceive it. There's a really great book called Story Brand about how you should use the hero's journey for marketing. And oftentimes, a lot of companies make the huge mistake of making themselves the hero in the hero's journey, when your customer is always the hero and you're always the mentor, you're always the guide. Because if you make yourself the hero, then your customer will be confused and won't know what to do. So you want to be really sure that you are creating and crafting messaging in which you are the mentor and the guide, helping your customer overcome an obstacle through your product or service. And so oftentimes, value propositions are difficult to nail, difficult to create, or not, or they're actually easier to create, difficult to nail. So sometimes that changes, and I think it's really important to get feedback from your customer and just see like how are they perceiving how you're thinking about their pain point. Do you have a robust go-to-market plan with the perspective of key internal stakeholders, including business, financial, sales teams? So a lot of times people build go-to-market plans, but they do it kind of in a silo. They don't get feedback from different stakeholders. This is something that I think a lot of go-to-market owners are confused about, is that you do not have to do everything in the go-to-market. You just own the go-to-market, and you're supposed to get feedback and also different people to own different pieces of the go-to-market plan. So it's incredibly important that you are not the one owning all of it. You will never be able to do a good job if you own all the pieces in the go-to-market plan. And I think delegating is actually an incredibly important skill set as a go-to-market owner, making sure that you're holding people accountable, you're asking them to own different pieces. So for example, when it comes to something like sales enablement, you do not want to be not only just creating everything, but you want to make sure that you are partnering with sales, you're getting their feedback, you're getting their buy-in. I think half the battle of go-to-market is about influence and making sure that that you are able to really influence not just your CEO, but also all the cross-functional teams. So super, super important. Do you know your customer journey intimately? So the customer journey is, it can be, and I'm going to go into this in a couple slides later, but a lot of times people think the customer journey ends at the time of conversion, but it actually should be a little bit further. It should end at the piece of, actually it should never really end, but it should end closer to advocacy. So a customer you don't want a customer to just become your, to just buy your product, right? You want them to love your product. You want them to become a referral loop for your product. And I think it's really important to understand exactly how many touch points are on the customer journey, because you can map out your marketing strategy against the customer journey, right? And that includes the product philosophy as well as marketing philosophy. So as your customer moves through the buy cycle process, as you're probably aware, B2B companies have a much longer customer journey than B2C companies. B2C companies oftentimes, not oftentimes, but I'd say more often than B2B, have a self-serve option. So they can just, check out online. And B2B companies this is why they hire a lot of sales teams. They hire a lot of account managers, because there's so many more steps, especially for the higher end business to business products. So, in those cases, it's even more important to know the customer journey and really understand where they're dropping off in the customer journey. Like, is your checkout experience so cumbersome that people do not want to, they don't want to really purchase your product because they don't want to fill out a profile, or they don't want to add all these other pieces of information? These are really just important questions to understand and ask. And lastly, how are you measuring the success of your launch? So every launch should have KPIs. You should know exactly what is a successful launch versus an unsuccessful launch. And sometimes, people find this out later, months later, where they look back at a launch and think, oh, we didn't get as much of a revenue lift as we thought we would with this launch. And I think having very clear targets and having an understanding of how many customers you expect to buy your product, not just for this month or this quarter, but also for the rest of the year. What are you doing for upselling? What are you doing for retention if you have a SaaS product? So those pieces are really important. I often find that marketers and product marketers are tasked with the launch, but then there is no real measure of the success of a launch. And I think, let me dial that back and say, I think product marketing is so difficult because there's not a lot of metrics that you can collect from a product marketing perspective, from a go-to-market perspective, especially if you compare it to roles like demand generation, right? Or paid ads, money in, money out, right? You know exactly where that money is going. Product marketing is more as a mix of art and science. And so I think a lot of people have a lot of difficulty with explaining to leadership teams how effective their role is and how important their role is. But I have seen product marketers make or break companies. And so This is why we're also seeing them becoming more and more higher compensated. So yeah, so that's kind of the 6 questions. Again, this is a very short conversation. I usually have a checklist of about 100 line items, but these are the main questions that I would ask before launching any big product or service. I think a lot of people get stuck in this process. And so just having a sense of the right questions to ask is half the battle, honestly. Maybe it's even 90% of the battle. Again, a lot of people spend time on things that just do not matter. And so when you're looking at your launch, thinking about the big picture, like how is everything that we're doing fitting into the larger picture? Oh, and I just added this actually at the end, but I spoke about it earlier. How does your marketing strategy align with your product strategy? This is, again, a super fundamental question to ask. And I think a lot of times product teams go off in a silo. They're building a product that that's maybe very technical, and they have maybe validated it from a product perspective. But oftentimes I have found that product managers don't have enough time to really spend a lot of due diligence with customers on the rollout of a product launch, which is why product marketers and go-to-market managers end up owning this piece. Like, we really want to make sure we're clear about, does the customer understand what we're doing? Is what we're doing from a product perspective packaged and aligned with our marketing strategy? Super important point. This is a very difficult thing to do. It's a very long process. I go into this in another conversation. I could, this is a much longer conversation, but it's about product tiering and creating specific, alignment with each feature and seeing how you can package each of these features. So that's a whole other exercise, which I don't have time to go into, but some main takeaways: know your customer. I think the last guest actually spoke about this, but I can't stress this enough. Again, this is what separates people from long-term success and short-term success. And this is just an example of the customer journey. So as you could see, this is for a hardware product that I worked on many years ago. But as you could see, there was a delivery piece, but you really want to take people all the way down to advocacy. You want them to really become more than just purchasers and customers. You want them to become advocates of your product. And some go-to-market fundamentals, these I call the 5 W's and the H. And maybe if you want to take out your pens and write these down, you write down who's the target customer, what is the target's key problem that our product solves, talked about value proposition, why. This is the one that I think a lot of companies get stuck on. Every time I ask them, why are you building this? Why this product? They always tell me what. So why are you working on this product? Why does this product exist? And this is Simon Sinek's golden, I think it's called like the golden circle rule or something like that. But you could check him out for more information on the why. He has a book called Start With Why, actually. And yeah, what differentiates it from other options? How does it match up to some alternatives in the market, competition in the market? Where will we reach target customers? Which channels? So of course, you should create a whole channel strategy, which we haven't had time to go into, but happy to answer questions. And then when is the right time to reach them and their decision-making process, and then how will we reach them? This is the piece that I think a lot of people don't quite understand internally. There needs to be a lot of prep before you launch a product. So operationally, do we have the right tools in place? Do we have the right enablement in place to get this product to market? And I think, oftentimes if you launch a product and internally you're not ready, it's going to be a really terrible product experience and customer experience. Customers might have questions, customer service teams might not be up to date with what's happening. So it's really, really important to spend more time on the how. I always say, like, every company has their own risk profile when it comes to how much risk they want to take when they're going to market. It's almost never the case that you'll have every single piece of thing ready to go and all your I's dotted and T's crossed. But you should get to about at least 99% there if you can. And oftentimes, so many teams are so under-resourced that you have to make a decision. Do you want to launch this product, or do you want to wait and then potentially get leapfrogged? But I think the fail fast model for me has always worked really well, except in cases like fintech and crypto, when your product has a lot more at stake, I think it's a lot trickier to fail fast and iterate. If you have a product in the fintech space that doesn't work, it just, people just don't really stick around for those types of products. They have a lot of they just have a lot more openness in like maybe B2B software or something that might fail the first time but might work the next time. So yeah, so those are these are the questions that I would ask before a go to market. And I also ask you to take some action. What can you do next to learn more about your customers? Could it be a survey? Could it be one-on-one conversations with some of your top customers? And then does your marketing funnel support your long-term product vision? I think those are the two big questions. The second one particularly being the one that I see most companies fail at. So that is my advice. A couple things. My book, Product Marketing Debunked, is on Amazon. You can check it out. And I also have a show on Go-to-Market called The Essential Go-to-Market. Thank you so much. Any questions? I think I've left like 7 minutes for questions.
Thank you so much. Please, guys, type in your questions. I'll get started with one here. So you talked about the product strategy, marketing strategy, alignment. So which comes first?
Yeah. So I've often found that product strategy comes first. So making sure that you have a thoughtful product plan, but also that you're getting feedback from customers as you're building out your product roadmap. It should be a mix of, I think Steve Jobs said it well. It's like, we don't want to ask our customers directly for what product we should be building, right? We want to have some sort of, hypotheses, but we often want to get them to input some of their feedback within the product roadmap, within the product lifecycle, so that we're not just building something in a vacuum, that it feels like it's a partnership rather than just a silo. So that's what I've seen work really well. For marketing, you oftentimes create the structure of a marketing strategy very early stage, but as you get closer to launch, there's a lot more that you can create from a marketing strategy perspective. So if you're looking at top of funnel versus mid funnel versus late funnel, they're all very different marketing deliverables, right? Like top of funnel is going to be entirely different than later stage funnel. Oftentimes, companies don't really know where they should be spending their time until they get to like closer to a launch and have maybe received feedback from beta, and they understand exactly where their customers are stuck in their marketing funnel. If they don't understand the product, then we need to do a lot more at the top of funnel to really educate them on what is the value proposition as we get closer to the conversion piece. And then they ask a lot more questions on, maybe how does this product, and feature set compare to some other competitors in market. Then we want to create product one pagers. We want to create, competitor battle sheets, those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. How is the sausage made? So go-to-market strategy, typically, can you walk me through a process? Is this like a one day we all sit together and just talk about it? Or is it like takes weeks and weeks and so how is it coming together?
Yeah. So go-to-market usually, from my perspective, has 3 different phases. One is the market validation phase. The next is the positioning and framing phase. And the last is building the go-to-market plan, which aligns with the marketing strategy and channel strategy. So oftentimes, I think a lot of people just go straight to go-to-market. They kind of bypass the rest, and they're like, let's just create the strategy for the launch, but there isn't enough due diligence with customers. They haven't really vetted their positioning framework and value proposition. So there's just a lot of preparation, that goes into the process. I often like to use the example of like cooking a meal, right? You can create the recipe, but at the end of the day, it's going to come out different all the time, and it just depends on so many factors, right? So the go-to-market process is something that I also like to create very early on, and then add to it as I get closer to launch. And it never really ends. So the best go-to-market plans are ones where you're constantly working with cross-functional stakeholders. Maybe there's a meeting every week or every other week. And I usually like to have these types of meetings and the go-to-market plan with different cross-functional stakeholders every other week up until a big launch. And then after the launch, it goes down to like every 3 weeks, maybe every month. But there should be someone who's owning that process. And it takes a lot of emotional bandwidth to own that process. So, it just requires a lot of hand-holding that I think a lot of companies are not aware of.
Hmm. Tell me more about that hand holding.
Yeah. So oftentimes a product marketer owns the go-to-market process. In some cases, I've seen straight go-to-market owners. That's when you have a lot of different features that you're launching. And so what is needed is for this person to ensure that all cross-functional stakeholders, like all the leadership teams within different functions, are aligned on what's happening with the launch. Because
Hmm.
oftentimes, people are out of the loop when it comes to all the details required for launching a product. So I often will send like a weekly recap, like, hey, here's what's happening. Here are some risks. I also color code my go-to-market. So I'll have like a red, yellow, green for some of the line items. And I'll basically say like, we're off track with this piece. I'm giving it a red. We're not going to be able to do this before the launch. Do you want to proceed? And so I just have a lot of conversations with CEOs and leadership teams on that process.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yasmeen, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.